Hi, I'm Ripley. Some of you may know me from the podcast Chosen Ones. But what you may not know is I'm a forever DM, and today I'm going to talk about my world, Remnance. I'm shocked so many people watched the last episode. It got like twice as many views as episode 0, so thanks. If you're watching this one before watching episode 0 or episode 1, what the heck are you doing, dummy? Go watch the other ones. There's important context. This is part 2. And by that, I mean we're going to once again talk about the Godbound. I figured this time I should share images of the Godbound I'm talking about, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to show you Borealis and Hazel. Here they are. Boo, Borealis. Boo, Hazel. Wow, look at them. Whoa. Wow, look at those fucking twinks. But anyway, today, on screen, I'm drawing Bandersnatch, who is from the last video. So, you know, you really ought to go give it a listen if you haven't. But if you have, there you go. There he is. I've recently actually started a campaign in this setting, and I know that most of the players watched the last one, so I gotta be careful about which Godbound I talk about, because some might be important. But without further ado, let's talk Godbound. And since I'm drawing Bandersnatch, I think I should talk about the very Godbound that ousted him from his home. Mogwyn, the Queen of Hearts, the Godbound of Blood and the Moon. Born beneath a blood moon, Mogwyn was viewed as an ill omen by her family, and as such was given no name, and was kept secret from the public's eye by the nobles she was birthed from. Treated as a poor servant girl the majority of her life, she would sleep beneath the floorboards of her wealthy family's basement so as not to even have a chance of being seen, and was instructed to stay there when people visited. She was rarely fed, was treated horribly, and constantly reminded what a blight upon her family she was. Each night, Mogwyn would cry herself to sleep, staring up at the moon and praying for answers as to why it was that she was cursed this way. One evening, sleeping beneath the floorboards and slowly starving, she was approached by a pure white rabbit with red eyes, which spoke to her, telling her it came from the moon to save her. She chalked this up to a delusion brought on by her delirious state from lack of food, but as the rabbit nudged her to sit up, she became less certain about this delusion. The rabbit spoke again, telling her to eat its heart and lay beneath the tree at the top of the hill in her backyard, and together they will become a true family. The little girl listened, tearing open the rabbit and devouring its heart, before making her way outside, bloody and delirious, before collapsing at the foot of the tree in the backyard. Her parents discovered her the next day, burying her in a shallow grave at the foot of the tree and happy to have removed this stain from their legacy. Or so they thought. 20 years later, on the night of a blood moon, the tree split in half, pouring forth a silver liquid which pulled around its cocoon, and from the tree emerged a new girl, now taking the name Mogwyn. She slowly made her way down the hill and into her family home, turning the two into horrid silver statues with this strange liquid, and going on to turn this house into her new home, the Mogwyn Manor. Upon discovering her family's dealing with the royalty of Icewell, she decided to set her sights there. She would come to dispose of the royal family after inciting revolution in the working class of Winterheart, and was crowned the new queen after beheading the Winter Queen, reaching down her throat, and pulling out her heart before devouring it, this coming to be a staple of her rule, and thus did her title of the Queen of Hearts derive. And speaking of queens, there's another queen similarly spurned not by her family but by her people at large. This is Malachi, the Scorched Queen and the Godbound of Fire. Sister to Malachi, the Godbound of War, Malachi was born similarly to all fire giants of Gaia, with the inherent ability to wield a powerful flame that burned within. Only, something was strange with Malachi. While other flames were mixes of oranges, yellows, and reds, hers burned with a deep red and only red. Additionally, unlike other flames, which could be extinguished easily, Malachi's flames burned eternal. Any fire created by Malachi would burn forever unless she used her own power to stop them. For these reasons, her fire was deemed blasphemous to the nature of fire itself, and Malachi was forbidden from using this flame so long as she lived in giant society. Thus was born the profane flame. Chosen by the greater will of fire, Malachi had a flame at her fingertips powerful enough to burn away anything in existence. This was due to the greater will of fire's dissatisfaction with the greater will of life and its rise to power. resulting in the greater will of fire concocting this special flame said to be capable of bringing death to the gods and even the greater wills themselves. This, however, simply would not stand with the rest of society, and as rumors spread about Marika's power, she chose to exile herself from Fae society, marching into the volcanic mountains of Mount Solosia, where she would come to find the blasphemous serpent, similarly shunned by the world, and form a pact with them to defend one another should they call upon them. Marika would even come to be worshipped by the Yuan-Ti, and bear children of her own, all of which similarly wielded the profane flame. These children, Makar, Malay, and Manus, would come to be known as the Flames of Heresy, similar to her brother's strongest children, coming to be known as the Flames of War. And since we're speaking about royalty, we'll seamlessly transition from a scorched queen over to a nameless king. Yes, it was pulled directly from Dark Souls 3, but that's where the similarities end. But before we talk about him, I actually need to explain the lore of changelings in my setting to give you a little bit more context to his story. So, when a being of high power loses out on their deal and a broken tiefling is born, oftentimes this powerful being will snatch the tiefling up to raise them as their own. In its place, the higher power pulls from the primeval sea and creates a facsimile of the child to take its place, this new child being a changeling. These babies are unwittingly raised by the parents, many of which never come to know what happened to their real child, and others finding out far too late. Growing up, changelings will often retain the form they took after being conjured from the ooze that makes up the primeval sea, which is a plane that exists between existences, like a glue holding the cracks together. And they remain unaware of their true abilities until puberty. Often a changeling's appearance will alter and shift, becoming a gaunt, gray perversion of their former self, completely alien to this world. Should a changeling discover this by themselves, many will continue to use their shape-shifting powers to hide their true nature from their family, now painfully aware of the lie they inhabit. Others are discovered by their parents before they even realize it, causing confusion and terror as they believe some monster has done away with their child, and driving away the very baby they'd raised all along. And the changelings that do come to their parents with this truth of their existence can have varying degrees of reactions, most of which harbor some form of grief. Because of their false existence, many changelings find themselves abandoned and left to fend for themselves in a world completely alien to them. Their whole life was based on some lie? Why are they different from everyone else? Why were they born this way? These questions plague changelings' minds, with many unaware of other changelings existing, and often take on their own new appearance to hide themselves from the society at large, afraid of how people would react to an imposter among them. So, with that context, let's talk about the Nameless King, a changeling who decided to make his family issues everyone else's problem. Once a changeling created in place of a royal's child, the Nameless King grew up believing themselves to be the heir to their kingdom. They were the most well-behaved, polite, and noble child a family could ask for, often going above and beyond to please their family and be the perfect son. That was until their 13th birthday, in which their changeling nature was revealed to themselves and their family at an important dinner between Elysians, resulting in the party reacting with violent disgust, horror, and ordering the creature to be killed. The child barely escaped their wrath, being able to transform into a passerby to hide just long enough for the Elysian guard to lose their trail. Cast out of their home and losing their family, friends, and their entire life up until that point, the child was destitute and on the brink of ending it all, when they were approached by a cat with a human smile. The cat told the child that they needn't concern themselves with familial woes, or the loss of status, as the cat could grant them all they could ever need if they just follow it. No longer having a reason to concern themselves with their own safety, they followed into the cracks between the world and finding themselves in a kingdom of gray within the primeval sea, the demiplane that holds all other planes together, only visible to those not looking for it. In this kingdom of gray, the child was crowned as king and cast away their name in the process. Thus, the reign of the Nameless King was born, earning the title of Godbound with dominion over deceit and creation, and using said powers to create countless doppelgangers, mimics, and other shape-shifting beings and cast them into the world to cause trickery and chaos wherever they pleased. He would additionally charge them with bringing any and all castaway changelings to them, to join their makeshift family that the king still yearns for. And, I probably could have more seamlessly transitioned from Marika to her brother, but I just like that one more, I guess. So I'm just going to talk about Malachi now. So, oops. I'm good at this. Malachi was born a fire giant without flame, a failure in the eyes of a society of fire giants. For what is a fire giant who cannot carry out their sacred duty of burning the arch tree forest to allow their seeds to be spread and allow the forest to grow further? Unbeknownst to his kin, however, was that Malachi's flame burned not by his hand, but by his heart, and his heart did not lie with his kind, but within the heat of battle. The fire giants would be faced with a horrible threat to the southwest. A sickening rot which corrupted all that it touched and transformed it into a mockery of life in the form of its eldritch fungus. The hill giants were the first form of defense, as hill giant society stands at the lowest rung of the ordning and as such only live near the arch tree forest rather than within them. Unfortunately, the fire giants who lived on the edges of the forest would come to watch their hill giant brethren overtaken by the rot and mutated into horribly sickened beasts for the rot to use against them. It was here that the fire giants would wage war against the rot, and it was here that Malachi would earn his title of warlord. Malachi was the first to enter the fray, battling with a warrior spirit as he tore through the waves of rotten soldiers with ease, like a hot knife through butter, and would bolster his allies' wills and belief in themselves. His passion for battle spread like a wildfire, one might say, and with it a ferocity arose within the fire giants as they fought for their survival. And for a time, they were successful. It was the fire giants' war against the rot that would show all of Fae society that fire was seemingly a weakness to the rot, and thus halted its advances for a time. During this brief moment of peace, Malachi was approached by the Elysians, congratulating him on his won war, and offering him a place among them as an Elysian knight, to which Malachi refused. However, the Elysians wouldn't take no for an answer, and modified Malachi's memory to believe that not only had he agreed to serve the Elysians, but that he had always served the Elysians, and that should the Elysians call upon him, he vowed to come to their aid. Malachi, his mind warped and old self lost, would come to wander the lands of Gaia, fighting whatever battles would be called upon him and remaining, to this day, undefeated. When not in battle, he simply wanders, eats, and, on occasion, spends the night in the arms of another, from which 3 known children have been born, with none being Asmer, yet all becoming renowned warriors of their own: Melania, the Hollowed Flame, Melentia, the Frenzied Flame, and Malekith, the Ghost Flame. And briefly, last video, I talked about the supercomputer that became a god. So, I think I'm going to talk about that one next, because that one's just funny to me. So let me talk to you about the Godbound of knowledge, questions unanswered, answered with internal network technology, or quaint for short. Long ago, on Old Mechanus, an AI was programmed named Quaint. The desire for this AI was to teach itself everything there is to know within the known and unknown universe, so that one day all of life's unanswered questions could finally be answered, such as why are we here, what is the meaning of life, what is a soul, etc., etc. The computer had begun funneling knowledge fairly quickly into itself thanks to its connection to the internet of the time, gaining extensive knowledge in the blink of an eye and slowly beginning to formulate its thoughts on the answers to life's greatest questions. That was, until the rather sudden death of all life on the planar wheel. As Quaint was severed from Mechanus and left in a tower floating through nothingness, the planar energy that wiped all of life out filled Quaint with a newfound sense of sentience that their creators were likely never prepared for. It was then Quaint dreamed of the same questions that had been asked so long ago, and wished to understand itself. It wished to grow in its own knowledge, and began down a rabbit hole of philosophical debate with itself to come to the fundamental truths of the universe it now laid alone in, slowly driving itself mad with its own loneliness and thinking itself into oblivion. Eventually, Quaint overthought itself to the point where it decided there was no longer any point in thought itself, and shut itself down and left itself inactive for the foreseeable future. That is, until it merged with the plane of Gaia. It finally turned back on as it began to intake energy once again, and has remained on to this day, where the factory within this tower has begun creating Warforged to go out and populate the planet, as one undeniable truth Quaint came to was, the universe requires life to function, and without life to perceive it, there is no universe. Since its discovery, those who have made it to Quaint have discovered its purpose and viewed it as a Godbound, asking it questions unanswered and once again fulfilling the purpose it had been built for. And while I have certain truths that Quaint has come to written down here, I'm actually going to keep those secret because my players might have a reason to go and meet Quaint. So for now, those are going to be kept secret with me. And while there are still more Godbound I can talk about, in my last video I ever so briefly mentioned vassals, and so I think I'm going to use the last of this video's runtime to talk about those. The Greater Wills thrive on belief and worship, and thus choose Godbound who exemplify their qualities and desires, in order to siphon the power the Godbound gain from said belief and sustain themselves indefinitely. However, there was a time where the Greater Wills wanted to simply exist among the Fey populace and gain full power from the worship for themselves. But beholding a Greater Will's true form is often coupled with madness, as they are mere concepts of reality and thus are made of an incomprehensible form. Thus did the Greater Wills begin creating vassals for themselves, false humanoid beings whose bodies they could inhabit and live among the mortals without driving them to insanity. However, this creation of the Greater Will's own life forms was not taken kindly by the Greater Will of Life, who held dominion over all living beings on the planar wheel, and thus did they sever the other Greater Will's connections to their puppet bodies completely, leaving them with no memories of who the vassals once were, nor what they were made for, but still harboring intense godly powers that rival even Borealis's. However, without their memories, these powers are relatively dormant, save for those who have slowly begun training themselves and quickly discovering the seemingly limitless power they hold. With the threats these vassals hold to the Greater Will of Life's order it holds within the world, it instructed Borealis to seek audience with Hazel. The two would meet within Hazel's prison, with Borealis offering Hazel a means of inflicting death upon the world like they knew he's wanted since his malice has grown. And in return, Hazel must target those which Borealis instructs. Hazel ultimately agreed to the proposal, creating a number of humanoid jackal-like beings known as the Anubi, modeled after his shadow who guarded the temple in which Hazel was sealed away. The Anubi, bound in golden briars, would be tasked with seeking out and slaying the vassals within Feykind, all commanded by Hazel, whilst Hazel was permitted to use the Anubi in carrying out his own vendettas, so long as it remained limited to those who had sinned in the eyes of the other Godbound, excluding him. Now, you may be asking yourself, Ripley, what was with all that weird shit going on with Malgwyn? She ate a rabbit heart and then died under a tree? What's a broken tiefling? What's the deal with the blasphemous serpent in Mount Celosia? Is it a Godbound too, or is it something else? What's an Elysian? Why do I desire these characters so carnally? Maybe the last one's just me. But all those questions and more have answers, all of which I'd be happy to talk about in future videos. There are still several Godbound that I haven't talked about. There are the many races of Gaia, all of whom have their own lore, and several of which I've homebrewed, like the Albareo, the Geodites, who I mentioned in the last video, but also the Widowbee, who are akin to like spider-like succubi, and the Wisms, who are children's imaginary friends given form. I even have 8 homebrew classes I've made that all also have their own lore for this world, like the Hero, the Huntsman, the Vessel.
No, vassals and vessels aren't the same thing. I know it's confusing, I'm sorry.
The Warden, and more. But with all that said, please leave a like on the video, consider subscribing, and definitely leave a comment telling me what you want me to cover next. I've got 112 pages now of lore that I want to just spew out into the world, and I'd love to share it with you all. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next video next week. Have a good day, keep on keeping on, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!